As we think about the impact of President Zelensky's visit to the UK, I think it's worth thinking about what we have done in the UK to help President Zelensky and Ukraine in their fight against the aggressor, President Putin's forces from the Kremlin that invaded a sovereign territory, their neighbouring state, the state that had put its trust in Russia. Well, I don't think a lot of the bigger things that we are offering, like the Challenger tanks or the Typhoon jets that were mentioned the other day, give us wings. Well, I don't think we're in a position to provide serious wings. The Typhoon jets that we're thinking of are already out of date, and we are already struggling to get spare parts for them. It would be more of a symbolic gesture than a real gesture, even if we provided these. But we are setting the standard, and we are arguably galvanizing other nations to provide help which is genuinely useful. We've actually provided, I believe, about 4 billion euros of help. Let's put it in euros rather than pounds. Let's put in a currency which we can rely on. And, but Ukraine needs more. And there's no good crowing about what we provided if it's ultimately not enough. So we have to make sure that we can keep we can keep our end up, and that we can keep delivering something that is of use. I think that something that is of use is our spirit and our positivity. And that is, whatever you think of him, encapsulated very well in the gung-ho attitude of Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson did it brilliantly. And his failures elsewhere as a Prime Minister should not undermine his extraordinary achievement in leading the way to help Vladimir Zelensky in his effort to ignite the spirit of his people and to target resistance to Putin and his forces, and particularly the criminals from the criminals and the mercenaries from Prigozhin and the Wagner Brigade. I think we haven't done enough in targeting the extraordinary propaganda efforts made by Russia. The extraordinary propaganda. The propaganda not only directed towards Ukraine, but the propaganda directed towards the rest of the Russian population across that huge country. We can and we should be challenging the claims that are made on a daily, hourly basis on Russian media. We can and we should be helping those individuals who are trying so hard to put out a counter-narrative and to interview real people across the country who are brave enough to actually speak out, or whose reticence to speak also is incredibly potent. Their reticence to say how wonderful Putin is. If he's so wonderful, it would be at the tip of their tongues. It isn't. It isn't, and that tells us a great deal. This is a president and a tyrannous regime that needs to be questioned, and the messages it put out need to be countered. Russia has led the way for years in propaganda. It was there long before Goebbels, and it was doing its job. In the early days of the Bolshevik Revolution, where trains loaded with early cinema equipment were crisscrossing the Russian countryside and showing films, often animated films, that put forward a very clear message about how great the Russian Revolution was. And it was the fact there was no other media. And the same thing is true today. There is no other media, and Russia knows how to do this job. But what is interesting, and what I think we should remember, is that we also in Britain know how to do this job. And although in the Second World War it was the engagement of the Disney company which harnessed the sort of propaganda efforts of the West, it was smaller companies like Hallis and Batchelor in Britain that really got the message, brought the message home. And I think we look in vain for those companies who are working today to counter Putin's message. We look in vain. And we wonder why our governments are spending so much money on futile promises of Typhoon jets that will break down when they should be funding serious efforts to counter the propaganda in Russia.